Well, to discuss this in more detail, I want to bring in Joseph Moreno. He is a former Justice Department and national security prosecutor. Thank you so much for coming on to talk about this with me. You are not a signatory to this letter, and I'm curious as to why not. Were you asked to be, and do you agree with what your former colleagues have said?
Hi, Bianna. Well, you're right. So first off, no, I was not invited to sign this letter. I certainly reviewed it. I have a heck of a lot of respect for the 1,000 or so individuals that signed this letter. I've got a lot of former colleagues on there. And look, I understand what they're saying. I completely respect their position. I'm not quite there. I think that the Attorney General has an extremely difficult position. And I think that statements he made, like the one last week to ABC News, where he said, look, the tweets have to stop. You're making it impossible to do my job. That's important. Now, I get it. Some people might say that's too little too late, but I think under the circumstances, you have to look at the history here. The significant cases against people the president was close to did move forward. The Mueller probe was allowed to be completed. So I think while this change to the sentencing recommendation to many people may seem like, wait a minute, that's a bridge too far, I think in the big scheme of things, this issue is being blown out of proportion.
Really, because it's interesting, and as Shimon just mentioned, that there has been a long history of really a norm that the DOJ is separate from the White House and from politics in general, that it is independent. And so many people had questions as to why the Attorney General was stepping into a case that was so close to the president. Obviously, he was saying that these tweets were not helpful, but he didn't walk back any or question any of his own actions, right?
Well, I don't think it's Bill Barr's style to walk much of anything back. He's certainly his own man. But, I mean, look, the department did operate independently. He's saying that he, the Attorney General, made the decision himself that he felt the recommendation by his line prosecutors was too extreme. And it was not because of political pressure from the White House or anywhere else. And I do think it's important to, yes, appreciate the independence of your line prosecutors, but at the same time, there is a chain of command. There is a deputy chief. There is a U.S. attorney. There is a main justice, always over any case, especially a case of such political importance. So I do think that it can't be that the Attorney General has no ability to reach into cases if he has a bona fide concern about how it's being handled, even if that case involves someone close to the president. Otherwise, no Attorney General could ever get involved in a case regarding a president that appointed he or she.
Nonetheless, it is striking that all four line prosecutors did remove themselves and step down from the case. And I'm going to ask you a question about what happens next in that specific case in a moment. But I want to bring you to a story that just took place within the last hour, and that is an op-ed that was written by Donald Ayer. And he's the former Deputy Attorney General under President George H.W. Bush. He wrote this in The Atlantic just this morning, and it's titled, "Bill Barr Must Resign." In it, he writes that Barr has appeared to function much more as the president's personal advocate than as an attorney general serving the people and the government of the United States. Your reaction to that?
I fully acknowledge that there's a lot of unforced errors here on the behalf of Bill Barr, and they started with his rollout of the Mueller report. I fully acknowledge that. He could have handled that a lot better, and he certainly gave a lot of ammunition to people say, wait a minute, he does seem like he is basically getting the president's back an awful lot. Very different than how Jeff Sessions ran the Justice Department in 2 years. He was criticized as having no hand on the steering wheel with respect to the White House issues that concern them. But I think looking back, people think maybe they like the Sessions model better than the Barr model. And I fully understand the criticism. Again, I'm just not sold that we're at the point where Bill Barr has to resign, because I don't think anything he has done has certainly skewed justice or done anything to irreparably harm the Justice Department's reputation for independence and competence.
Quickly, and because I mentioned it, Judge Amy Berman Jackson is expecting a conference call that she's just scheduled tomorrow ahead of her hearing on the sentencing of Roger Stone. How unusual is a conference call to be scheduled?
Well, I mean, it could be for any any number of things here. I'm not really sure why that call is being done. It certainly could be in reaction to current events. It could be a move to postpone the sentencing, which certainly might happen. But I think it's also important to note that all these things that we're fighting about here, these are recommendations. The judge will ultimately, she will decide what sentence Roger Stone will ultimately receive, and she will have her own determination of what the sentencing guidelines dictate. So at the end of the day, This was a recommendation from the line prosecutors, overruled by a recommendation from the Attorney General, but ultimately the judge will decide.
It's up to Judge Jackson. Joseph Moreno, thank you. We appreciate it.
Thanks, Bianna.